Alrighty, Broncos country. We are live. Let's just make sure that everything is nice and stable across the YouTube platform before we officially jump in here. Welcome in, everyone, to this Denver Broncos Syndicate Training Camp check-in live stream. I am your host, Gage Madrid. Today was a very rough and very somber day out at Dove Valley as the Denver Broncos have lost two of their big-name wide receivers, one of them for the entire season. But before we jump into that, guys, if you could just do me a big favor and leave a like on this stream, I would really appreciate it. It helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out to fellow members of Broncos country just like you and me, and helps the channel grow and get seen by more and more people. So I would really appreciate it. It's a free and easy way to help us grow and show your support. Now, unfortunately, the day started off for the Denver Broncos quite rough at training camp today. It was supposed to be the first padded day of practice, and just like on the first padded day of practice last season, Denver Broncos wide receiver Tim Patrick went down with a season-ending injury. It was on the second play of 7-on-7 drills. Tim Patrick lined up in a three-receiver bunch set. He was trying to release off the line of scrimmage, took two steps, and ultimately ended up crumpling straight to the ground. He screamed in pain. He screamed a couple of expletives in frustration, threw his helmet, threw his gloves. You knew right away when you saw Tim Patrick go down that it was going to be a devastating injury for him. And unfortunately, the MRI did indeed confirm that. Just a few minutes ago, Mike Kliss did tweet that the MRI revealed that Tim Patrick suffered a full and complete tear to his left Achilles tendon, and he is out for the 2023 season. An absolutely devastating blow for him. And it's going to be a really tough blow for the Denver Broncos as well. But I do feel like we've got the pieces necessary to help absorb that blow and absorb that loss at the wide receiver position. And that's something that we will go ahead and get into in a little bit. But the Denver Broncos also got hit with another blow today, as it was announced that KJ Hamler suffered a heart condition called pericarditis. In fact, if we come over here to this statement that KJ put out on Twitter or on Instagram, it says, after feeling some chest pains while working out on the break before camp started, I got everything checked out and was diagnosed with mild heart irritation called pericarditis. I've got a great treatment plan with medicine, no, not surgery, medicine, and am taking a quick break to get this all taken care of so I can get back to doing what I love. Now, it has been announced that Tim Patrick has been waived by the Denver Broncos. It has been announced that the Denver Broncos have waived Tim Patrick with an injury designation. They have decided to ultimately see where they've waived KJ Hamler with an injury designation, not Tim Patrick, sorry. They've ultimately decided to see where he is in a little bit of time. They can bring him back onto the active roster once he is fully recovered and after 3 weeks after he is fully recovered. At that point in time, per NFL injury settlement rules, the Denver Broncos can indeed bring back KJ Hamler from that. So they could re-sign him to the active roster. But right now, KJ Hamler is a free agent. Again, just two absolutely devastating blows for the Denver Broncos. First of all, I wish both KJ Hamler and Tim Patrick nothing but speedy recoveries. KJ, man, heart conditions are no joke. That is something that is super scary for him. And I'm really hoping that he's able to get that figured out and that he's on the football field sooner rather than later, because that means that he will have fully bounced back from that. And just for life in general, just from the human being perspective, I hope KJ Hamler has a super speedy recovery, and same for Tim Patrick. Both of these guys are some of the hardest working guys on the Denver Broncos team and some of the biggest leaders in our locker room, and you know that they're going to be sorely missed just in terms of that alone, not even their production, just in terms of their leadership and who they bring, what they bring to this locker room, man. It's just a really devastating set of circumstances for the Denver Broncos, losing both Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. But the good news out of this situation is that we may be able to get KJ Hamler back at some point. Once he is indeed over this heart condition, the Broncos can re-sign him to the active roster. But again, man, I feel like once Tim Patrick went down with his ACL tear, or with his Achilles tear, it really killed the overall vibe at practice today. And I feel like Sean Payton was going to have a much more intense, much more ramped up practice, but Tim Patrick went down early in 7-on-7 periods, and after he went down, it just really felt like Sean Payton didn't want to risk another significant injury like that happening again, and so he kind of shut almost everything down, and the team did mostly light work. They did get some 11-on-11 work with pads on. I feel like tomorrow is going to be a much more ramped up day, but after seeing Tim Patrick go down, it was a really devastating sight, especially for the offensive players. Russell Wilson was right next to him the whole time, consoling him, and he actually helped him onto the cart after Tim Patrick got hurt. So I think Sean Payton recognized that mentally the players' heads weren't going to be in the game today after Tim Patrick went down, and he's going to ramp up the practice period tomorrow with the pads on. But we did get some work in. I do have some notes here, but I just wanted to do this stream mostly to kind of allow Broncos country to vent their frustrations a little bit and just kind of take this as like a therapy session, if you will, after losing two of our biggest leaders in the locker room, especially Tim Patrick. KJ Hamler was in a bit of a tough spot. I talked about yesterday in a video how the most realistic chance for him to stay on the Denver Broncos roster was to go through this exact process. Now, I was under the impression yesterday that KJ Hamler had suffered a setback with his pec, but that's actually not what happened. He ended up suffering again this myocarditis issue, which he addressed on his Instagram and said that he's going to be taking that time away from football to get himself right. And I'm just hoping that he gets back to 100% as soon as possible. Heart issues are no joke. Cardiac issues are no joke. So, yeah, this is a really, really tough one for KJ Hamler. Mentally, it's another blow. And this is something that I feel like gets lost in these situations quite a bit, is the mental side of this for these people, because these are human beings, man. They're not gladiators. Yes, they play a physical and violent game, but mentally having to go through an injury like this and the rehabilitation process and not being able to walk for a while and basic stuff like just not even be able to bathe yourself on your own, that's something that's going to have to be the reality of Tim Patrick for a while, and he already had to stare down a year of that reality last year after suffering his torn ACL. So I just feel so bad for Tim Patrick and for KJ Hamler, because no one works harder than those two to get back on the field. I mean, Tim Patrick brought in KJ Hamler to live with him because he was trying to help KJ get in a good spot mentally on the field, and now both of them are back down in a tough position. I'm hoping that they're still living together, honestly, right now, because they can kind of help pick each other up and keep each other out of the dumps right now, as I know both of them are going to be going through a whole lot mentally. So I'm really hoping that Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler still live with each other and will be like a support system for each other as they go through this. Again, it really does seem like KJ Hamler is going to be back on the field at some point in 2023, but for Tim Patrick, it's his second season-ending injury in 2 seasons. He hasn't played a down of football since January of 2022 in the season finale of the 2021 season against the Kansas City Chiefs. And now he's going to be staring down again another year of grueling rehab. We got Mark from Steelers Nation Australia in the house. Good friend of ours here on the show. Says, I'm here so I don't get fined. I appreciate you, Mark. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. But so overall, just to kind of move out and transition away from the wide receiver talk a little bit, What are the Denver Broncos going to do now to absorb the blow of losing Tim Patrick for the entire 2023 season and losing KJ Hamler for at least the first part of the 2023 season if the team does indeed decide to bring him back? We do have Jess Tiss in the house, great friend of the show. What's up, peeps? What's up, Jess? Rough day here in Broncos country for sure, but we're sitting here trying to evaluate how the Denver Broncos are going to move on at the wide receiver spot in wake of Tim Patrick being gone for the year and KJ Hamler. I imagine he'll probably miss at least 4 weeks of the regular season because the way that this injury settlement basically works is that once KJ Hamler gets healthy, the team will have to wait 3 weeks before they could bring him back in and re-sign him. So let's say, for example, that the team estimates that KJ Hamler is going to take, 6 weeks to get right. I believe that would put him right around week 1 of the regular season. Then they'd have to give him another 3 weeks per the NFL IR list before they could bring him back. So potentially, if the Denver Broncos do indeed decide to bring back KJ Hamler, the earliest that we could be looking at him returning would be probably week 3, week 4. So it's almost the equivalent of an IR stint. I really genuinely believe that the Denver Broncos doing this with KJ Hamler and waiving him and allowing him to work his way back onto the roster this year, that showcases that the Denver Broncos still do like KJ Hamler and that they still do believe in KJ Hamler. And otherwise, I feel like they would have just let him sit on the NFI list for the entire year because that's something that they could have done. But instead, they are allowing him this opportunity and this avenue to get back on the roster. But now let's transition here and see what the Denver Broncos are dealing with at the wide receiver position in wake of this situation with Tim Patrick's Achilles and KJ Hamler's heart issue. We got D-Rock in the house. Another year with injuries. Indicator points to yes. Now, I want to touch on this. I'm going to actually come back on screen here because I know that the natural knee-jerk reaction from Broncos country is to basically be like, oh shit, here we go again. Oh well, I just dropped an S-bomb on this channel, I don't care. The natural reaction is to be like, oh crap, here we go again. But I don't know necessarily if this set of injuries necessarily means that the Denver Broncos are going to be set for the same amount of injuries that we saw last year. Last season was a true anomaly. We saw 22 players end up on IR at the end of the season. That's an entire starting unit's worth of players on both sides of the ball. So, we got Sav Locos Tails in the house. Broncos, let's go. Welcome in. Hope you are doing well on this fine evening. But so the Denver Broncos, so the natural sort of knee-jerk reaction for the Denver Broncos here is to panic. But again, the Denver Broncos had 22 injuries last year, 22 players that finished on injured reserve, which is an entire starting unit's worth of players. So that's truly an anomaly. The strength and conditioning staff from last season in Lauren Landau and his staff, they are no longer in the building. And who is in the building is Dan Dalrymple, former Saints head of strength and conditioning, somebody that Sean Payton trusts and is familiar with. And he's got a good track record when it comes to injuries. With Tim Patrick, it was a very unfortunate injury, but I feel like it was one that was indirectly related to his torn ACL on his right knee because this was a left Achilles injury. Generally, when a player suffers an injury to the other leg after suffering a big injury to one leg, that means that they were overcompensating. I fear that this was a compensation type injury for Tim Patrick. And also, it was just bad luck. He took a bad step where you could see his foot was planted in the ground, but his heel was flexed. That's like the classic mechanism for an Achilles tear, and it's not often that you're going to take a extended lunging step like that. You're normally going to have your feet a little bit more condensed and not as dorsiflexed. So this was just a really unfortunate injury for Tim Patrick. And as far as KJ Hamler is concerned, it could be a number of things. It could be something genetic. It could be something else, something that was brought on later in life. But with KJ Hamler, I feel like this was probably something that he had for many, many years just dormant, but something brought it out to light. I mean, I don't know what happened with KJ Hamler. I mean, just the strenuous physical activity, that kind of stuff can happen, man. So with KJ Hamler, he's going to get himself right. He's got an inflamed infection in his heart. They can put him on an aggressive regimen of medications, and he will get himself right. But jumping back over here and looking at our depth chart at the for the Denver Broncos wide receiving core. Right now, obviously, this has been updated to reflect KJ Hamler being waived, but it has not been updated to reflect Tim Patrick going on IR, which will happen within the next couple of days. I expect the Denver Broncos to bring in a wide receiver. We'll talk about who they could potentially bring in. I don't think it's going to be any big names or anything like that. Right now, this injury to Tim Patrick means that Jerry Jeudy is going to be kicked to the outside to the Z receiver role. Cortland Sutton will be our X receiver, the main number one receiver just in terms of alignment, maybe not necessarily the number one receiver in terms of the first read from Russell Wilson, but the number one receiver in terms of alignment from outside to inside. Jerry Jeudy will be the number two, the Z, the flanker, whatever you want to call him, and Marvin Mims is now going to be pressed into duty as the main slot receiver for the Denver Broncos. And Marvin Mims has had an up and down camp. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury. Today he actually grabbed his hamstring once again during a 7-on-7 rep. I think it was like right after Tim Patrick went down too. So Marvin Mims needs to get himself right as well. But the one guy that I want you guys to keep an eye on here is Marquez Callaway. He has developed a really strong connection with both Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham over the last 3 days of training camp. And now with Tim Patrick going down, we saw Marquez Callaway right away getting significant reps with the first team offense. He was the one who jumped right in place of Tim Patrick, basically. So Marquez Callaway is now expected to have an even more elevated role on this Denver Broncos offense. We've got Ray Haas in the house. Afternoon, folks. Silver lining, Hall of Fame is Hinton is safe. Yep. I actually now do believe that this means that Kendall Hinton is safe and that he will be on the Denver Broncos in some capacity in 2023. I didn't feel that way yesterday prior to Tim Patrick's injury or KJ Hamler's medical situation, but now we need guys to step up, and Kendall Hinton is going to have to be one of those guys, for better or for worse. Jess says, I appreciate that you keep the focus on the men who are players and don't just treat them like gladiators. Absolutely. And that's something that I feel like gets lost in translation a lot of times, because these guys do play a physical and violent game. And I know that a lot of people like to almost, I don't know how to put this into words. It's really hard to put this into words, but a lot of people feel like these players are mentally immune to some of the trials and tribulations in life that we as ordinary human beings go through, and that's not the case. Just because they make a significant amount of money playing a game for a living doesn't mean that they're not going to come with dark spots and mental trials and tribulations in their life. And this is something that we have seen time in and time out, players going into really, really dark mental areas after coming off of injuries like this. So I hope for nothing but the best for Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. And once again, I'm really hoping that they still live together. Exactly, Jess. It dehumanizes them. It does. But again, I'm really hoping that Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler are still living together to kind of help keep each other out of the dumps and keep each other focused on getting back on the field, which is the task at hand for both of these guys. So Marquez Callaway is going to have to significantly step up. Same with little Jordan Humphrey, who has also looked quite impressive in training camp. Saints fans on Twitter are ripping me a new asshole right now because I said that Marquez Callaway is going to step up and little Jordan Humphrey is going to step up, and they didn't like that very much. But they also forget that Marquez Callaway led the New Orleans Saints in receiving in 2021, Sean Payton's last year there, and he led them in receiving with like 700 yards because the team suffered a bunch of significant injuries. at the wide receiver spot, especially with Michael Thomas. I would gladly take 700 yards receiving from Marquez Callaway as a number 3 receiver. I would take that in a heartbeat, especially as a number 4 receiver if you want to throw Marvin Mims into the equation. Like, Marquez Callaway, if he brings that sort of production to the Denver Broncos, that would be outstanding. Last season, he kind of did fall into the doghouse with the New Orleans Saints after Sean Payton wasn't there, but it seems that the main person who believes in Marquez Callaway is Sean Payton, so he's going to find a way to utilize him in the best ways, and I didn't feel like the Saints did a very good job at that last season with Pete Carmichael at offensive coordinator and Dennis Allen at head coach. He kind of got relegated to the doghouse. I don't think that's going to happen here in Denver. And I know that Saints Twitter is just absolutely laughing right now that Marquez Callaway is going to see an extended role in this offense, but I think he's going to play really well. Couple of players from last season, a couple of undrafted free agents that stood out at camp again were Jalen Virgil and Brandon Johnson. I feel like they're pretty much locks for the practice squad. One of them may even sneak a spot on the active roster. Brandon Johnson's the most likely candidate right now because he's the bigger body and could sort of fill that Tim Patrick role in the event that someone like Marquez Callaway or Little Jordan Humphrey goes down. Let's hope that that doesn't happen. But Brandon Johnson can kind of be a good backup to the backups, if you will, and can kind of be like a Timmy P light. And I could see Brandon Johnson almost having a similar rise in his career that Tim Patrick did. An undrafted free agent who had to wait for his opportunity, but once he got it, he seized it. And I really feel like with Brandon Johnson, he's made some nice plays in training camp. He's run some good routes. He's had some nice deep connections from Russell Wilson and from Jarrett Stidham and from Ben DiNucci as well. So keep an eye on Brandon Johnson as well. We also have 3 slot guys that I would mostly consider in Michael Bandy, undrafted free agent from this year, Taylor Grimes, who's made some nice plays in camp as well. He might be like a Wes Welker, Julian Edelman type player. Keep an eye on him. And even Montreal Washington as well. He's made some plays on offense, which I can't believe I'm saying. He's somebody who I thought was going to be cut before training camp even started, but now he might even be our primary punt returner and could see some gadget type snaps on offense with KJ Hamler not being here for the time being, because Montreal Washington does bring that same elite level of speed. We got Robert in the house. Salute to you, my friend. Raiders fan, good friend of the show. But overall, guys, I do feel like the Denver Broncos are going to need to bring in at least one more body for training camp at the wide receiver position, maybe even 2. And if we come over here to Twitter, let's see if I can find the tweet from Dov Kleiman. Give me 1 second, guys. I'll transition back over here and I'll pull up the tweet. I am such a unorganized host. I apologize for that, but this is a spur of the moment stream here to discuss where the Denver Broncos are sitting right now. Jamil Johnson says, Brandon Johnson, yeah, we just talked about him. I really feel like he could be a big, sneaky, under-the-radar player for the Denver Broncos. They could probably get him on the practice squad, and if we suffer more injuries at the wide receiver spot, he could really step up. All right, sorry, guys. I'm just trying to find this tweet here from Dov Kleiman. Here we go. So if we come over here, with Tim Patrick believed to be out for the season and KJ Hamler having a medical issue, here are some free agent wide receivers the Broncos can sign. Julio Jones, I don't know about that one. I mean, I don't think Julio would want to come to Denver at this point. I feel like he wants to go somewhere that's a little bit more championship ready, if he even is going to play at all this year. Jarvis Landry, however, is an intriguing possibility. He's somebody that has familiarity in this offensive scheme. Although he didn't play under Sean Payton last year in New Orleans, he did play in this offensive scheme. So he'd have familiarity with where to line up, what routes to run, so on and so forth. So if the Broncos do want to bring in a veteran presence to kind of absorb the leadership blow from Tim Patrick, then I could very easily see somebody like Jarvis Landry potentially being in that equation. Kenny Golladay, no. T.Y. Hilton, unfortunately, is just on the wrong side of 30. He's probably not going to play another down in the NFL if we're being realistic. Same for someone like Mohamed Sanu, who's been in the NFL, it feels like forever now. Sammy Watkins could maybe be an intriguing option. He kind of fell out of favor with the Green Bay Packers last season, finished the season back in Baltimore where he had played previously. Sammy Watkins, I don't know. I mean, none of these players really excite me, but if one of them did, aside from Jarvis Landry, just slightly more than the others, I'd say maybe it's Sammy. N'Keal Harry, no. Rashard Higgins, former CSU guy, no. Preston Williams, maybe. He had a couple of nice years with the Miami Dolphins, but I don't know about that one. And then Amari Rodgers, who was recently waived by the Texans, former third-round pick by the Green Bay Packers, definitely not. I feel like there's clearly something wrong with him. Like, there's something there with him because he's got the physical talent, but he's never been able to get on the field. We've got Michael Ronquillo in the house. Welcome in, my friend. Good friend of the show. Great supporter of Broncos country. Good to see you. All right, guys, so I just wanted to kind of get on this live stream here and kind of discuss where the Denver Broncos are at the wide receiver spot in light of the injuries to Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. I'm hoping that both of these guys are able to recover as quickly as possible. Tim Patrick, I just absolutely am gutted for him. I'm just glad he got paid before the injuries started to pile up for him. He suffered a very serious ankle injury in his last season at the University of Utah, which caused him to go undrafted. He always has had the physical skills and the physical talent, but injuries have been a constant theme for Tim Patrick throughout his career, and it's been really unfortunate. But overall, the Denver Broncos are probably going to have to add some bodies to get through camp at the wide receiver position, to get through the preseason at the wide receiver position. C says, man, we'll never get to see Russ and Tim play together for another season. You know, I really am hoping that that's not the case. I'm really hoping that Tim Patrick can get himself right and get back on the field next year for the Denver Broncos. He is under contract with us next year, but I don't know, man. It's going to be tough for him coming off of both an Achilles injury and an ACL tear in 2 consecutive years. That is certainly going to be a tall ask for him. All right, Broncos country, I just wanted to kind of dip in here and see where we are at the wide receiver spot and just kind of allow you guys to vent a little bit after what was an overall pretty crappy day for the Denver Broncos. Let me know if you guys have any questions before we dip out of here. Tomorrow we will be back out for day 4 of training camp. Today was the first day of pads, but it felt like we never really got anything that was significant accomplished today after the Tim Patrick injury. We did do some more 7-on-7s and a little bit of 11-on-11s after the injury, but it felt like Sean kind of scaled things back after Tim Patrick went down. And today we're probably going to be, or tomorrow we're probably going to be in line for a much bigger, more physical workout. Jess says, good thing Russ is in running shape this season. He really is. Russell Wilson's out there running with confidence in training camp. He is not afraid that if his first read isn't there, he'll pull it down and run. And that's something that we saw him be very hesitant with last year. But that's really good to see, and I'm hoping that it continues to translate into the regular season with Russell Wilson. All right, Broncos country, I'm going to go ahead and dip out of here. And until next time, guys, before we dip out of here, if you could just leave a like on this stream, I would really appreciate it. It helps push us out and helps the channel grow and get seen by more and more members of Broncos country, just like you and me. All right, guys, and until next time, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.